Hey, what's up everybody? It's Joe from HpTF, and in today's video we're going to talk about the FoKus Apollo from an audio company called Noble. Now, Noble is known for in-ear monitors, some wireless earbuds, but their IEMs are not cheap. I think their least expensive one is about $600, so this is more of a premium brand. So this has a $650 price point. Now this was sent to me for review by Noble. It won't affect what I say about it, but I always want to disclose that. I also do not participate in any special affiliate or marketing campaigns. I don't want money to be a factor, or at least people to think that money is a factor in what I base my reviews on and what I say about it. So I just want to disclose that. Now I want to do something different and just disclose this up front because this is a longer video and I don't want to waste your time. This sound signature is bass forward. It's a strong bass sound signature, and it has a dark treble tuning in general. Not like terrible, but it's definitely a stronger bass, not overly bright sounding headphone. You already know the price. The big kicker with this guy is it has a detachable boom mic, so I will be talking about this from the context of gaming and working from home. And it also has some of the best passive noise isolation and as a result ANC performance of a headphone that I've ever tested. So if that's also something you're interested in, keep that in mind. With that being said, the rest of this is going to be quite in depth because if you're looking to spend $650 on a headphone and you're seriously considering something like this, I want to cover everything in detail so you know exactly what you're getting to help you make an educated decision. So let's start with the basic specs. It has a 60-hour battery life with ANC enabled and 80 hours with ANC disabled. It supports Bluetooth 5.3 and it has aptX, aptX HD, LDAC, AAC, and SBC codec support. So it has a wide variety of device support, giving you the highest possible bandwidth if your device supports it. This guy uses a mix of materials here. Now the top has kind of a woven textile fabric headband, and on the inside of it, it's lined with Alcantara. And I've used Alcantara products before on a steering wheel, for example, and anytime that you're handling it over a long period of time, it will eventually start matting up. It's kind of like the equivalent of a patina effect for different materials. So if you ever need to clean this, just use a damp cloth and that will help preserve the life of it. I wouldn't let it get too greasy and rubbed down because it won't look as good as it does here in the video. Then you have an aluminum chassis. So this is all metal here. These ear cups are plastic. And then you have the same matching woven textile fabric on the inner part of the ear cup with a protein leather pad. Now these pads are very, very plush. They're also quite large and they're really accommodating for a variety of ear shapes. I mean, when it's this large and deep, you shouldn't have too much of an issue with pads. On the note of the pads, I know people are going to ask if it's replaceable. Now on Noble's site, they suggest using a pick tool, like something plastic. And if you're ever going to do that, I suggest trying it from the bottom first, because if you ever slip or make a mistake, you kind of want to hide your mistake, and usually the bottom is the way to go. Now there's a plastic lip that holds this in place, and if you go in towards the back side of the cup on the inside, you can feel the edge of the plastic lip. I was able to grab it and pull it from that lip, which I recommend because when I use the pry tool, even though I was really careful, you can see just a little bit of a mark, if it's even visible in the camera, where I pushed in to pop it off. Now the driver construction, this is super cool because this uses a 40mm dynamic driver and a 14.5mm planar magnetic driver. So this is like one of the first hybrid two-way headphones that uses this driver technology, planar plus dynamic. And then this little guy here is actually the microphone for the active noise cancellation. Keep this foam there, it comes in handy. I'm sure they're using it for acoustic tuning, but it's also for comfort. And then all you have to do to reinsert this, you can see this little hole on a couple sides here. Make sure the pad is seated properly. And on this on the back side of the pad, you can see this gasket. You just have to align those pins. And once you've done that, it goes in relatively smoothly. You just have to press it in. Now I've done this a few times, and admittedly one of my clips kind of broke. So I'm just gonna warn you now. Even though you can be careful, things happen, and don't take apart the pads more than once unless you really need to, just to prolong the life of the clip. Once it's on though, the comfort is fantastic. The clamp force is moderate. It's actually on the lower side compared to some headphones I've used out there, but once you wear it, the big difference with this, I'm gonna do my best to maintain the same talking volume as I did without the pad. This blocks out so much exterior noise before I've even turned it on. This is huge because you may not want to use active noise cancellation, and when you do that, it does affect the sound quality. I'll talk about that later. So you can get longer battery life, or if the headphone is off, because this has an analog connection here on the bottom, you don't even have to turn it on to use this product. So that's kind of cool. Now I mentioned this is a protein leather, which feels really nice. It's the closest thing to a real leather, you know, without the whole animal part. And it's a little bit more durable than a traditional leatherette. It does sweat or build up some sweat over a long period of time. So if you live in a very humid climate, just keep in mind, anytime you deal with a pad like this, it is designed to create more of a seal, which helps with bass performance and noise rejection. So that's why you use it. But it's not going to be as breathable. Now, from a plushness standpoint, and especially in a drier climate where that's not an issue, but on the softness, I found this headphone extremely comfortable. The padding isn't like massive, and I don't expect a suspension strap on a portable headphone just because it makes it like twice as big, and it looks a little bit ridiculous when you're traveling. There's no like folding cups where it tilts in, but you can see I have a lot of articulation. I can wear it around my neck thanks to this design. It feels really comfortable. These little things are important for day to day because the chassis allows you to kind of, you know, wear it and use it how you want. Telescoping yokes have a wide variety of sizing as well, which I'm really pleased with because I've had a lot of headphones. You can see the bottom of my ears poking out. I've had a lot of headphones that even on the smallest setting just fit my head and it's barely loose. And I don't know why some headphones have kind of grown in size because our heads haven't been. So this is just really nice because it's not maybe going to be the best for huge heads. Maybe the yokes could come out a little bit further. I don't have a massive head, so I can't say for sure how it's going to fit you, but I do have more room even on the largest setting. And then on the note of space, let's take out the accessories because I want to show you what's included. Now, I already mentioned the microphone. This is a killer feature for me. I love that they have this, and this is the reason why I decided to review this because, of course, I wanted to try it as a gaming headset as well, and more on that in a moment. You open up this case, so you slide it out of this, then you have this case, then you have the Noble designed case here, which if you can see the box, it's a pretty cool little attention to detail, so I really appreciate that. Then you pull out this case. This is an EVA foam case. It's a harder shell. It's not like super soft, and you can tell it is a big case. Now, when you compare it to some other manufacturers' case designs, this is on the bulkier side, but at the same time, when you look at how thick the ear cups are, there is a big reason why. So the only thing I'm going to say is when you're carrying it, the Noble design is upside down. I would have preferred it flipped because when you're carrying it, I would think you'd want your brand to be more readable. However, when you open it, the Noble design or the Noble text needs to be facing you because it kind of flips towards you. So let's crack this open. Now, this isn't perfectly packed because I've been using this. When you fold these cups in or rotate them, it tucks in like that. And you can see just how high it is to the surface because it's a thicker headphone. So it's not like they could have made this magically thinner. I think this part maybe could have been more flat and you could have shaved off half an inch or something, but it is what it is. Then you get a couple cables in the box. You have a USB-C cable. You have an analog dual 3.5 millimeter TRRS because there are microphones, of course. Then a bunch of handy little accessories. You have a 1/4-inch adapter. You have the travel adapter, which is not something you usually see. I've pretty much only seen this on Meze audio products lately. Then an adapter that I'm not too crazy about. This is a 4.4 Penacon connection to the 3.5 adapter, so you can use this cable. When you deal with a cable like this, some amps that are balanced are not designed to be converted back to single-ended where the ground is shared. You can damage some amps when you do that. So be sure to know if your amplifier can handle that. If you only have a balanced out, maybe keep that in mind. Otherwise, I would strongly consider using a different way of connecting it. Now, on the note of cases, I'm going to talk about these headphones later, but I wanted to show you a few different ones. If you're familiar with FoKal, this is the FoKal Azurus case, which is the closed-back passive headphone. I stuck the Batiste in here just so you can see the perspective. I just didn't want to go get the case, to be honest. But it's the exact same case, just a different color. This headphone isn't much thinner than the Noble Apollo. So if you're looking at a bag's perspective and you can see how thick it is, this is quite a big difference when you're packing it in your bag. So then you look at the Edifier S5 case, which is definitely just as thick, if not possibly thicker. It's just more compact. You can see the other case around it, just because this headphone design is different. It has a little bit less expensive headband construction, and the headphone collapses and folds in. And then Apple gives you a diaper for your headphones, so it's not really a case at all. This is going to protect part of the headphone at the sacrifice of basically everything else. So obviously that's very compact, but That's kind of like putting a band-aid on something, so I don't really think that's the best way to approach it. All right, so let's focus on the controls real quick. And on the right ear cup, you have an ANC button at the top. Obviously, once it's on, pressing it will toggle through ANC modes. You have ANC off, you have transparency mode, which you can hear your surroundings quite well, actually. This is really nice if you're traveling and you don't want to be oblivious to what's happening in the world around you, but you still want to hear your music. You can put it on transparency mode. Tapping it again puts it on ANC, which is going to have a drastic reduction in exterior noise. So if you want to tune everything out, that's obviously what you want to use. Now my ANC button is a little bit loose. Basically, if I shake it, you can hear that rattle. That's all coming from the ANC button. The good news is nothing else is an issue on the headphone. And when I do walk, or if you're like walking kind of aggressively in a silent environment, you can hear that rattle just a little bit. This is like the earliest production version of the Apollo that came out. So I don't know if they fixed that later, but if you have a rattle, just check there. That might be where it's coming from. It wasn't a game breaker, and if you're listening to anything, you never hear it. And then you have your power and volume controls on the side, which it does take a while to turn on. So I'm going to press and hold so you can see this in real time. So that takes a little bit. It takes just as long, if not what feels like slightly longer, to shut down. So you do have to hold it for quite a long period of time. If you have to force it in pairing mode while the unit is off, press and hold that power button and just don't let go. And then eventually you'll see the light start blinking. This is self-explanatory. You have your volume controls. This middle button also doubles as your action button. If you press it once, it'll play pause your music. If you double press, it pulls up your assistant for your phone. So like Siri, for example. Now on the left side, it has a microphone mute switch. I absolutely love this switch because whether the headphone is turned on or off, that mic switch works. So if you're using this as an analog gaming headset or a work headset and you're using it for conference calls, you know that you're going to be muted. It works on the internal microphone system and the boom, whether it's on or off. So I love that it's not like a questionable functionality. Now I mentioned the 3.5 millimeter input. It's obviously TRRS because there's a microphone. You have a USB-C on the side here, and then you have your microphone input, which has that special shape so you know when you plug it in that you're doing it in the correct orientation. So let's talk about noise isolation, both active and passively. Passively means that if you just put it on and you don't turn the device on, how much is it reducing your background noise? Active, of course, using the microphone system to actively reduce noises such as an airplane sound, fans buzzing away, your HVAC system. That's usually where it's most beneficial. So I want to start with the Edifier S5. Now, admittedly, I'm using the gel freeze pads because they are just so damn comfortable, but the noise isolation is pretty terrible. It's definitely closer to an open back than most closed backs I've used when you switch to a pad like this. The leatherette pad does have more noise isolation, but it's still the worst performer of the four here if you are trying to block out exterior noise. Now, this headphone is not cheap. It has a retail price of $500. This is the Edifier S5, and it doesn't have any noise cancellation, any active. So that passive performance is all you have to go by, which means of the four here, I ranked it the lowest if your noise isolation is a concern. And then you have the Apple AirPods Max, which use a fabric material. It's the only pad it comes with. I like the removable design with the magnet system. These pads are quite deep as well. So these are really breathable. I didn't mind that. And the noise isolation is better passively than the Edifier S5 with their gel pads. It's comparable to the S5 with the leatherette. So passive noise isolation is okay, but then it adds active noise cancellation. The active noise cancellation is all right. It's definitely not as good. It's comparable, maybe slightly worse than the FoKal Batiste, but not as good as the Noble FoKus Apollo. I haven't used a Bose or a Sony, which I know are typically class leaders in active noise cancellation technology. So unfortunately, I can't speak to those yet. Maybe that'll change in 2025. But this one's okay. I don't think it's going to do anything magical, but it does help reduce background noise enough. Then you go with the FoKal Batiste, which is the closest thing to the FoKus Apollo here. Better passive noise isolation than the Apple product, partly because of the pads using a traditional leatherette. This is not real leather. Quite comfortable. The active noise cancellation, in addition to slightly better passive noise isolation, means it works rather well. I've traveled with this a lot. I still hear some airplane noise, but it is attenuated to a point where I don't have to blast my music. Then you get into the Noble Apollo and the FoKus Apollo. The FoKus Apollo, even before I turned noise cancellation on, is almost better than any of these with ANC on. It is so good from a passive standpoint, which is huge. Then you add active noise cancellation, and it's the only one that felt like it drowned out almost everything going on in the background. My PC can have like a weird humming, like a resonance in the chassis of my case. When I put the fans in quiet mode because of lower RPM, it kind of creates a buzzing sound once in a while. This completely got rid of that. It's the only headphone I've ever used that the active noise cancellation blocked that out. So it was really nice. That quiet noise floor is a huge selling point to me for this headphone. You're not buying it purely for the sonic performance. If background noise rejection is super important and you like all the other features I'm going to talk about, this is just absolutely killer. It means you don't have to play your music, movies, whatever you're doing as loudly. And that low noise floor helps on a competitive gaming. It protects your hearing. It's better for listening fatigue. Tons of benefits there, so this is a huge call out for the Apollo. Now there's a lot of different ways you can use this headphone and headset. So right now I'm talking to you via Bluetooth using the internal microphone. And now I'm still talking to you on Bluetooth, but now I'm using the boom mic, and you can hear the difference in both sound quality and volume. And this is what my voice sounds like on the USB connection with the internal microphone. And this is what my voice sounds like using the USB connection with the boom mic. I do want to note that there is a slight buzzing sound coming from my left ear cup because it's charging at the same time I'm using it as a USB DAC. So there's a little bit of a sound feedback there. Didn't affect the sound quality otherwise, but if you're sensitive to that, I don't recommend using USB for your audio. Now this is what I sound like on the internal microphone in analog mode with the headphone turned off. And this is using the boom mic in analog mode, again with the headphone turned off. And this is using that exact same setup with the boom mic in analog mode, but this time I turned the headphone on to benefit from the ANC and the onboard DSP. All right, now let's get into sound quality and start with the objective side first, which is the measured side, and it takes my opinion out of it, and I use a Gross style KB006X Pinaclone. It's basically just the way one ear simulator hears this headphone. It's not how everyone's going to hear it, but I will touch on that because there are variances of headphones among ear to ear, and some headphones vary more widely than others. So starting with the bass, you could see this is a bassy headphone. Like you can see a clear boost in the sub frequencies, and it tapers down just over 150 hertz. Because this tapers down and it doesn't bleed into the mid-range too much, and you have a really good linear mid-range, at least the middle of the mid-range, it sounds quite natural. This is a really good tuning. It doesn't sound overly bloated or boxy sounding because it's not bleeding into the upper bass, low mid. So vocals can still sound quite natural. And then you have this like really deep thunderous bass to back it up. It sounds fantastic on a lot of music, but I understand this is going to be too much bass for some people. So I'll get into the subjective stuff later. Now, the big change when you see from like 1000 hertz to about 2600 hertz, there's definitely a recess here. What happens is you have vocals that are pushed back in the mix. Certain instruments don't jump out at you. You know, guitars don't have the same kind of bite that something more forward has, like the FoKus Apollo, which has a lot more emphasis in this area. So it's a more relaxed and can come across as less resolving headphone purely because it's not blasting you with stronger frequencies in the low mid-range and mid-treble. Now my rig showed a spike at 6000 hertz, and it didn't come across as bright as that spike will seem. For example, the Sennheiser HD800S, that peak that happens closer to just over 5K for me, it was stronger, and that seemed a little bit more sharper. This still seemed a little bit smooth. Again, it doesn't sound too congested. Now, the way these drivers are designed, it uses the 40mm driver, dynamic driver with the 14.5 planar, and you can't really tell where the crossover happens. It's relatively seamless, and because the driver is placed, like the planar is coaxially placed in the center, coaxial centric design, the dispersion of high frequencies versus the low and mid-range is quite controlled as well. So you can't hear like treble hitting up here, for example, on your ear. There's some kind of wonkiness that happens when you have drivers at different heights very close to your ear. So I'm really glad that they put them in line with each other. Now the upper treble extension is nice. It's not like overly bright, so don't expect this to sound incredibly airy, but it's not so dark or congested sounding either. So it's a good balance. Again, I think they're going more for an everyday forgiving listen than something that's cheating you to give you like fake perceived levels of detail because they're blasting you with treble. This is a very unfatiguing sound profile to listen to. Now, if you're doing custom EQ with the app, which I'll talk about shortly, this is measured with the default EQ. They have a lot of different presets. I didn't want to measure them all because frankly, this whole process takes a long time. I do a lot of settings. And when you turn on active noise cancellation though, This red line represents the exact same EQ profile with noise cancellation enabled. Very different sound. It comes across a little bit more shouty and nasally thanks to this lift at 1K. There's a little bit more treble energy up here, but not like drastic, and I think it's close enough to be within the margin of error. But it does sound brighter simply because the bass is scooped, as you can tell. There's a big reduction in sub bass. There's a little hump right about 110, 120 hertz, or 100 hertz, we'll say. And then it's recessed in the 250 hertz area. So if you are doing custom EQ, because the Apollo app, the FoKus Apollo app, allows you to create multiple EQ profiles, I would create one and label it for A and C and create a different one to your own personal preference for A and C off. That way, when you're toggling it, you can benefit from both. Now, I did measure, just to let you know, it's not shown here. If you enable transparency mode, the frequency response is the same as being off. So active noise cancellation is its own sound profile. Otherwise, transparency mode and disabled is going to match the green line. Now, I did plug this into analog. So let's show you that line. That is the blue line. I'm going to turn off the active noise cancellation just so we can compare apples to apples. When the headphone is turned off and you plug a 3.5 millimeter connection to it, this is what it sounds like. And it does start getting overly thick sounding. There is more mid-range bass emphasis that bleeds into the mids, and an even further reduction into the upper mid-range and low treble. Too much for me when you factor in how much bass it has. So you do have to kind of more aggressively EQ it. So I thought that if we turned it on, we could benefit from DSP. And sure enough, if we turn off the off mode, if you will, when the analog connection is turned on and you turn the headset on, when the analog connection is plugged in and the headphone is turned on, they sound almost the same whether you're on Bluetooth or analog. However, the custom EQ profiles that you make in the app only apply to the Bluetooth connection. I did some really crazy changes to try to force this to happen, and I could not get it to sound any different. So if you are using an analog connection and you want to do custom EQ, whatever you're plugging it into at the analog side has to have its own EQ, whether it's computer software and free EQ like equalizer, APO, and piece, or a DAC or media player that has its own onboard EQ. So that's the only way you can customize it. So going a little bit further, if you use the USB connection, again, it's the exact same thing as analog. This is all within the margin of error in seating variation. So as long as you understand how the EQ works and how much the active noise cancellation changes the sound, because again, that is quite drastic, that should hopefully give you a really clear understanding of what to expect. Now, channel matching is also great, at least my unit was. So if you're concerned with the left and right driver matching, usually you have more of a variance with closebacks, I've found, especially ones with onboard electronics, because it's not the same electronics from left to right. So the left and right drivers match really well on my particular unit. I do want to cover one important thing before I get into subjective sound quality, and that is positional variance and HrTF variance. So when you put this on your head and different heads, some headphones vary wildly in sound quality. If the headphones get shifted forward, up, down, in a little bit, it changes the frequency response quite drastically on a lot of headphones. I talked about the Focal Bassheads earlier and the Apple AirPod Max. Both of those have a ridiculous amount of variation on frequency response depending on where it's seated on your head. And as a result, because of this, if your head shape is different, you have a different ear pinna than mine, because we all have unique ears, we're like snowflakes, this will affect how you hear the headphone. And because of that, what I measure and talk about, you may not hear. You might hear a lot more upper treble, for example, or mid treble, I should say. This guy has a lot less variation depending on position. I do multiple seatings. I take it off my measuring rig and put it back on. I got a very, very narrow window of variation in frequency response, whereas the Bassheads and the AirPod Max was all over the place. So this is a really nice thing to have a consistent sound quality. It's also very consistent if you're talking, you open your jaw, moving it around in your head, it doesn't vary as much. The Edifier S5 was also very, very consistent as well. So if you are concerned with variation of sound based off position, those two definitely have the edge there. All right, so let's get into the subjective side and what I hear and what I enjoyed for sound quality. This is a bassy headphone, like not just a lot of bass, but it's good bass. It's actually quite textured and nuanced, and it's super dynamic. So if you want a punchy bass whether it's rock music or movies or gaming, it doesn't really matter. It's going to hit really hard, and then the sub bass extension is incredible as well. Because this has a relatively smooth mid-range, I don't find the vocals to be like too colored. The only thing that's apparent is the bass can be overpowering to the vocals in terms of amplitude, so the vocals just don't come across as forward as it did on something like the Focal Batiste that I mentioned earlier. So when you do custom EQ, I ended up reducing bands 125 and below by 3 or 4 decibels. And once you do that and then boost 2000 hertz by only a few decibels, that was the minor EQ I needed to kind of preserve what I think this headphone's, signature sound profile is like, but just tame it a little bit and bring the vocals slightly forward in the mix. That was more of like my universal EQ, so I can listen to a lot of different things without ever having to mess with it. And again, this was with ANC turned off. I kind of alluded to this in the objective stuff, but the relaxed sound profile is really easy to listen to. So even if you like to turn it up a little bit, I was never like surprised by a really sharp treble spike that causes you to wince and causes listening fatigue. So very smooth listen. Again, timbrally speaking, it's not so much coloring it as it is just putting things back in the mix. I just prefer it to be a little bit brighter. There was a small resonance or peak just over 3000 hertz that can sneak up on you in a couple tracks, but I didn't ever find it too offensive. Again, I think it's one of those things where if you have a lot of good bass, there's like a level of, it kind of makes other things more acceptable, almost like it's a band-aid for some other possible deficiencies in the sound mix. And it's not that this sounds bad, but you tend to look over certain issues otherwise because the bass is so intoxicating. If you're a bass head and you just want a wireless headphone or a gaming headset and you're willing to spend this kind of money, it's seriously one of the best bass deliveries I ever heard. It blows the doors off of the other headphones I mentioned in the bass department. I want to touch on gaming because it has a boom mic, and that is a big reason, again, why I took this on. This is not the sound profile I like for competitive gaming and FPS, but for immersive gaming and story-based games, it's going to be wonderful. It's super easy to listen to. It's extremely comfortable. Again, the biggest thing to consider is if you want that noise isolation. Now, when I did my custom EQ and I reduced the bass significantly, I boosted frequencies I cared about for footsteps and the upper mid-range low treble area, now it becomes an incredible gaming headset. That subtle detail and nuances I was talking about really showcases well here. There aren't a lot of closebacks that can perform to that level, especially with aggressive EQ. So I guess the asterisk is what makes it acceptable. If you have to do this level of EQ, well, you could always do that to other headphones as well. I still think something like the FiiO FT1 at $150 is a better value purely as an analog headphone for gaming, because it's literally a quarter of the price. Now, the big kicker with something like this and why you would pay more over the FT1 is the noise floor. And we already talk about frequency response being a competitive advantage. And some people will say that you don't need super high-end stuff for gaming and you can still be competitive. That's true to an extent. Once you get used to the sound, it's fine. The FiiO FT1, again, is a better value there. However, if your PC fan is making a lot of noise, and let's just say it's at 55 decibels, kind of loud, obviously, but it's here, right? Footsteps are right about here at a distance, and you're trying to hear that. Well, if this is louder, you don't really hear those footsteps until they're too close, and sometimes it's too late and you're dead. Well, on something like this that drastically reduces your noise floor, you hear footsteps sooner, regardless of frequency response. Not competing with exterior noises is a huge competitive advantage. The other advantage to this is listening fatigue, because you're not turning it up to compensate for noise floor to hear those footsteps sooner. When the gunshots and explosions happen, you're not overly amplifying sounds and hitting 95, 105, 110 decibels in your ears. That will damage your hearing. So something like this is what you would pay for to have a competitive advantage, but also protect your hearing for years and years of use. And listening fatigue is a seriously important thing. Ear health is important, and noise cancellation and passive noise isolation is a big reason to consider something like that. Now, I want to quickly compare the sound quality to a few of these because I brought them out earlier. So the Edifier S5, I talked about it in this review. I did an in-depth review on this guy and compared it to the Batiste. It was kind of like a head-to-head. With the gel pads, I love the comfort of this headphone. It is so good to wear for long periods of time. The issue I have with the S5 is it doesn't really have good noise isolation at all. And when you buy a headphone like this, chances are you're getting it for travel, because a Bluetooth wireless headphone, that's an important thing to consider. So it's one of those things where I don't fully understand the market for this. It sounds good. There's a big recess around 500 hertz that you can kind of EQ and fix a little bit, and the gel pads help as well. It sounds very clean. It sounds much more airy and spacious on the top end, and because it's leaky, it just doesn't come across as much as a closeback as any of these others here. The bass impact, while fast and it extends quite deep, it's not slammy at all. There's no like real impact to the bass, so it's kind of sounds a little bit flat. Then you have the Apple AirPod Max, which admittedly I only got because I'm developing pads for this guy. It has okay bass. I'll be blunt, I don't understand the value of this unless you just want something that's really easy to use to tie into the Apple ecosystem. There's not even a power button on this. I have to charge this thing all the time because just sitting in my office, it goes into efficient low power mode. Then I put it on and there's like 20% battery left. That drives me crazy. Noise isolation's okay on this, comfort's okay. There's the decent amount of bass to it, but there's like no ear gain area at all. So like the whole 3 to 4 kilohertz area, it sounds so dark and recessed, and then the treble tuning itself, it just doesn't sound right. And it's one of those things where it adjusts sound as you wear it. But placement variation, moving it on your head, it just keeps changing the sound quality, and you have no control over that because it's Apple. So if you just want something that's easy to use, I do like the comfort of this a lot, and I love the controls having that little dial on the outside. But purely on sound quality, definitely a more punchy bass than the Edifier, but it doesn't sound as clear. It's less resolving, and it sounds like a cheaper headphone. Then you get the FoKus Apollo, really good dynamic punchy bass. It's just leaner than this. It's not as much bass, but it still has a good impact to it. Really wonderful to listen to for rock music. Vocals are much more forward. I love the app. When you turn these on, they kind of light up, which some people like or dislike, but at least with the FoKus app, you can turn that off if you don't care for it. The one thing is, though, I didn't mention this earlier because, frankly, this video is as long as it is. The FoKus Apollo app, not great for iPhone users. I did not connect to it every single time. I had to keep tapping the headphone to connect, and after multiple tries, it eventually worked. On Android, it always worked fine. So for FoKus, if you just want a more premium experience for iOS, I think this is an easier headphone to use. It just always worked consistently. Now this always connected to my iPhone, and it's improved because they've come out with firmware updates. One of the reasons why I didn't review this right away is because the way it came out of the box, they over boosted the EQs, and it was distorting at higher volumes. So like it was clipping at a digital level. The signal level was clipping. So the firmware update reduced the preamp from what it seems, so now it's much cleaner. So if you look at old reviews and they talk about distortion, it's probably because they were looking at the older firmware. I like this headphone a lot. I like that the case is more portable, and purely for travel purposes, I think the Batiste, even though it's $800, just executes the travel requirement a little bit better. It's just more compact, and it's easy to use, frankly. The reason why I would still consider the Apollo is if noise isolation is of higher value to you and you're okay with doing all of the custom EQ I talked about, or if you want a gaming headset all included and you have some onboard or ability to do your own EQ, this is just so good, as like you can literally own one headphone for everything model. So there is some value to this. I would take other models over it in specific use cases, but if you have one size fits all type approach, hopefully this helps you understand where to go with it. I still found it extremely comfortable. The leatherette pads did get a little bit warm for me over time, but never like too bad. The overall physical comfort was so good, I could still wear these for a long period of time. Okay, so that wraps up this crazy long review. I really like the Apollo. It's one of those things that grew on me the more and more I used it. And thanks to firmware updates and other minor things, I've come to appreciate what this brings. And that's kind of like the duality of being a single product but executing a lot of things. This attachable mic is such a cool benefit, being able to use it as a gaming headset at home or a headset for conference calls for work, and then unplugging that and having a really clean, nice looking, well-made, and comfortable headphone for the go with exceptional noise isolation. That is such an important thing when you're actually traveling. So I think it's a good product, and I hope that by watching this you learned what you were looking for. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'd love to see you at the next video. Stay safe. Thank you so much for the support, and I'll see you next time. Bye.